Hello Astro subscribers, and welcome back to the final video of the Exalted and Debilitated Planet series. Today we're going to be talking about Exalted and Debilitated Ketu, and if you don't know what an exaltation and debilitation is, I will go over it. And if this is for those people who, if this is like the first video in this series that they've seen, in astrology, an exalted and debilitated planet is when a planet which corresponds to a subpersonality is in a sign or house that it is most comfortable in. And signs and houses in astrology are basically like the settings of the story that these subpersonalities go through. It's like the hero's journey, and each planet is its own hero, and that comprises the unity, which is you. And through using astrology, you can look at the motions of the planets, and you can determine things that are liable to happen in the future. They understand better the causes of things that are happening in the present, or understand the causes of things that happened in the past, and that is useful. So, today we're going to be talking about Exalted and Debilitated Ketu. And Ketu, first and foremost, is debilitated in the sign of Taurus, and Ketu doesn't really have an exaltation point. I would say the exaltation point of Ketu is when it is conjunct any active planet. And I'll go over in another video what the active, passive, and stable planets are. That might honestly be my next series that I make. But the active planets that Ketu can be conjunct in your chart are Mars, Sun, and Jupiter. So if Ketu is conjunct Mars, Sun, and Jupiter, it's exalted. And the reason for that is that basically if Ketu is by itself, it produces a blindness to that subject, it produces a mastery of that subject, and it produces a detachment from that subject. So the best example of what Ketu is in a literary or movie type scene is like there's this sort of trope in kung fu movies of like the blind kung fu master or the blind master in general. I think there was a Jackie Chan movie called Blind Master, but basically this is an example, a good example of what Ketu is. It is a person who has it's a subpersonality that has no awareness of where it is, but is a master of that awareness, or of that place where it is nonetheless. It represents things that you're already good at in your last life. And generally speaking, the purpose of Ketu is to detach you from the things that you were good at in your last life so that your soul doesn't become super overdeveloped. And that is basically the function of Ketu. And if it's alone, you will sort of slowly, that area of your life will slowly sort of decompose. So if Ketu is in Libra, a person at the end of their life might not even be interested in relationships, and they're more about their self-image. If Ketu is in Capricorn, at the end of their life, a person might not be interested in work at all. Like they might go join a monastery. These types of things. However, if Ketu is in conjunction with an active planet, meaning Mars, Sun, or Jupiter, you can also think of those as the planets that rule fire signs, or co-rule fire signs in the case of Jupiter. What happens is that the activeness of that planet actually sort of synergizes with Ketu, and the Ketu can be seen as kind of like a past life battery pack. And what tends to happen is when somebody has, let's say, Mars conjunct Ketu, they become that blind kung fu master. They become a person who is like so good at combat because they have this like past life mastery, but they're also, Mars is in that sign as well, so they feel the need to fight for that thing. So they become a person who's like detached, and they already feel like they've won the fight before they even go in. And it doesn't have to be a fight. I mean, Mars can represent battle and all types of things. It can represent business. It can represent architecture, engineering. I mean, anything you undertake is effectively Mars. the anything you undertake with an active desired goal or outcome, especially where you're competing with other people. That's Mars. So when Ketu and Mars are conjunct, it basically just lends Mars a ton of power from your last life, that you're born knowing this thing and you want to go do it and compete in it anyway, even though you've already won. There's a term in video games called smurfing, where a really high level player will go down into the lower leagues just to kick people around. That's basically what Mars and Ketu is like in conjunction. Now, when Ketu and Sun are conjunct, it creates a person who feels like very low self-esteem, but everybody else sees them as exceptionally high status. So they might, like, I've talked to people with this placement and they're literally surrounded by people who are like adoring them. And I'm like, I was talking to them about Sun Ketu conjunction, and they were like, no, I don't have any friends. And they're literally surrounded by people who are like literally adoring them. Like the sun glyph where the circle has the dot in the middle of it, they were that dot, and everybody else was literally surrounding them, and they're like, I don't have any friends. They were basically blind to it, but everybody else could see that they were very popular person and somebody worth knowing. And when Ketu and Jupiter come together, I'm probably going to make a separate video on lunar nodes conjunct Jupiter, because it's a very, very interesting concept. But when Ketu and Jupiter are conjunct, what happens is a person becomes an isolated researcher, an isolated religious scholar. So, Jupiter is basically the information that you're here to gain. So wherever Jupiter is placed, let's say if Jupiter's in Taurus, you're going to gain information through food and money and that kind of thing. If Jupiter is in Scorpio, you're going to gain information through deep research in the occult. If Jupiter is in Aries, you're going to gain information through like your own personal ambitions and self-image. So when Ketu is conjunct Jupiter, it creates a very unorthodox thinker who goes off alone to do their research, and they're able to come up with all these ideas inside their head that are perhaps potentially more advanced than what society as a whole, as a collective, can produce. And if somebody doesn't have this placement, they're looking at this person like, why are they just sitting alone there and meditating? Like, are they talking to themselves? What's going on? But what's really happening is they have this collective internal society that is basically giving them the ability to internally perceive reality instead of doing what most people do, which is like look at reality through consensus and through groupthink and like watch the news and that kind of thing. Like they are their own broadcasting station. And that's what Ketu and Jupiter does for a person. And so those are the considered what I would call the quote-unquote exaltation points of Ketu. And again, they're not typical exaltation points because when a planet is exalted, it gets more like Rahu. And when a planet is debilitated, it gets more like Ketu, meaning it's really good at the thing, but it can't necessarily brag about it. Or like Mars in Cancer is a good fighter and very powerful and strong. But it can't really capitalize on its fighting ability because the power is so unfocused and disorganized and survival oriented that they tend to just get arrested if they fight. They aren't like, nobody looks at them and is like, I want that guy to be that guy drunk in a bar kicking everybody's ass to be a UFC fighter. Like, I want to pay him a bunch of money to be in a movie. It's like, no, it's like the guy's drunk in a bar and he just happens to be winning the bar fight. So yeah, Ketu doesn't really have exaltations because it's kind of like the ultimate debilitator. Ketu exists to debilitate a planet so that you don't focus on it. So that you focus on the area where you actually need to improve rather than the area where you're born strong. So yeah, Ketu doesn't really have a typical exaltation. It only is exalted in conjunction with things. Now, the debilitation point of Ketu is Taurus, and the reason for this is because when Ketu is in Taurus, and remember I said Rahu is exalted in Taurus, and the reason Rahu is exalted in Taurus is because Rahu is the god of the material world, and Taurus is the sign that wants to indulge in the material world. Rahu is hunger, Taurus is food. So obviously Rahu is like, putting Rahu in Taurus is like putting Rahu in a buffet. It's like putting an endlessly hungry, famished demon in a buffet. And they're just going to eat forever. And they're going to be happy and content to do that because it's essentially a starving person. That's what Rahu represents. Now, Ketu is the opposite of Rahu. It's basically the opposite side of the coin. They're the same coin, but Ketu is tails and Rahu is heads. So when Ketu goes into Taurus, it's basically completely detached from the material world. But because Ketu is not starvation when it gets put into Taurus. It's more like these people, like food will just appear for them. Money will just appear for them wherever they want it or need it. Like these people very rarely experience material privation, but it tends to come to them in a way that's sort of outside of society. It's like disrespectful. Like they can't flaunt their material wealth. Another thing that happens with people with Ketu and Taurus is that anytime, unless they have Mars conjunct it, anytime they actively go after a materialist lifestyle, they tend to get frustrated and give up. Like they tend to just leave jobs because Ketu is basically constantly telling them like, hey, look, you're already good at this. You already understand the material world. You don't have to go and like master this anymore. So, and if they keep trying to master it, then Ketu will create circumstances in their life where they lose their job because they break their leg and they can't go to work. Or they lose their job because they were going to get a ride with somebody and that person ditched them. So it will forcibly remove them from the material things, but it will also give them everything they need. So maybe when they lose their job, they get an unemployment check and they get like $1,200 for the rest of their life every month. You can't really brag about having an unemployment check, even though most people who are at work, if you ask them like, would you rather go and do this all the time, or would you rather get $1,000 a month for the rest of your life and never have to work again? They would take that $1,000 a month, but they can't do it. They can't get it because, the world isn't set up that way. But somebody with Ketu and Taurus, they get things like that. People will just randomly give them money. They might find a wallet with like $500 in it. But it always comes to them in a way that does not gratify the ego. It does not, you can't brag about your achievements because they're not even your achievements. Like you can't brag about somebody coming and giving you $500 on the street for no reason. So that's basically what Ketu and Taurus is. Like it gives you what you need, but not what you want. And so you can't brag about it. And when you try to engage your ego to get what you want, you tend to get cosmically punished for it in ways that you wouldn't understand if you didn't understand astrology. And then, just to sum up, Ketu is exalted conjunct active planets, and it's debilitated in Taurus because it doesn't gratify the ego. So yeah, that was basically my video on exalted and debilitated planets. If you want to have some say in the next series, if there's an astrological concept that you're interested in, go ahead and drop it in the comments of any video on this series, and I'll strongly consider making that the focus of my next series. So yeah, till then, peace.